So yeah, I thought that it would be a good idea to connect with us all on Patreon and talk a little bit about this new moon, and share with me in the comments, peeps, as well as the chat box in YouTube. Just your own reflections as well. Any questions that you've got, I'm happy to respond to in that sense. So, just talk a little bit about the full moon in Pisces. One of the things that I I thought was pretty funny was my experience of uploading that video. My brain was still in August, and when I'd created the content, I was going, yeah, the 2nd of August, 3rd of August, as opposed to let me just move this, yes, that it actually looks like I'm looking at you guys and not just on the screen. So the 3rd of August, 2nd, 3rd of August. Whereas really, it was actually September. So I uploaded the video before, and then I was like, oh no, I need to take it down, because not only did I want to say something extra which I didn't capture in the video, so I can re-record it, and this is a great opportunity to do this. But when I actually sat down and tried to re-record it again, it was horrible. It was like the frequency, the space I was tuned into when I originally recorded it was not the same. So it was such a bizarre experience to actually get that content into a digital form. But there it was, and so I just had to overcome my own Virgo perfectionism, where I was just like, look, I'm sure people can understand that even though it says that, it is just a typo, and I'll be okay. So cool. Olayath Goldleaf, you're doing a test chat. Cool. So yeah, this is a live connect with Patreon, and a Q&A with Patreon. And so just to let you know that I will be posting this video to YouTube afterwards, as to let people know what we do in our Patreon community, and anybody that seems to be interested in wanting to join us, then you get a little insight into the process. So yeah. Okay. So before I go and respond to some questions on the actual Patreon itself, let me just talk a little bit about this full moon and some of my reflections post the video, and what I think I wanted to say, well, not what I think I wanted to say, but what I wanted to say, right? And I don't know how to start it, so I'm just going to kind of talk, and then eventually at some point there will be a thread. It's David. Hi, David. Thank you very much. Gold leaf. So I was listening to somebody talk about the psychological makeup of how we as human beings, or how we as humans, and our psychological and emotional makeup develops, and particularly between the ages of 0 and 2 years old. Okay. And what I was really excited about was how significant the construct of the way that we emotionally and psychologically develop, and these very primal stages, how that influences the responses that we express and act from when we're adults. And what I also noticed to be really interesting, that I wanted to tie it in, was the natural relationship between Mars and Aries, and Venus in Cancer, Pluto and Capricorn, right? So these constellations of energies and the signs that they're in. So to give a more concrete background of what it is that I'm talking about and why, this relevance of the way that we psychologically and emotionally develop between the ages 0 and 2 is tied in, is because when we go through transits in our lives, okay, when we go through transits in our lives, if they are tension aspects like a Pluto transit, or we experience a Saturn return, or we experience Pluto in relationship to our Jupiter, right? Or in general, when we go through a transit in which the psychological and emotional makeup of the way that we perceive reality, as in the transit comes along and Pluto invokes within us this necessary shift to take place. It might mean if Pluto's in your ninth house, that you come into contact with some form of knowledge that really, shapes the way that you perceive life. As an example, ninth house material, your personal truth. Or if you say have Pluto in your second house and you have a Pluto square that challenges the fundamental security that you have within yourself, how you feel abundant in your life. How do you understand where value is? And mostly with Pluto in the second house souls, you'll find that the challenge of financial security is one that you have to go through, the fear of loss around that. So when we go through these experiences, these Plutonian experiences or changes within our life through stressful aspects like Moon square Saturn, Venus in opposition to Saturn, the early imprinting of our psychological and emotional makeup contributes a tremendous amount to the way that we actually react, respond, and interface with life's stress that it provides you with, right? Or to use less practical terms, let's use more of EA's perspective. When the soul comes along and says, okay, here's a bunch of experiences that are going to transform you, and the way that you interact with and respond to and digest that reality is very much influenced by this early life conditioning. And there's another kind of thread that I want to integrate into this as well. And I highly encourage any of you that have just noticed, I posted on the Patreon page, the Saturn Workshop support thread. And I would like to get anybody that has started working on the Saturn Workshop material to come onto that thread and start asking questions about your experience, sharing your insights, anything that's associated with it. One of the things that I talked about in that Saturn workshop was understanding the emotional attachment style that you have. Okay. It's very important to understand that if you are really, really, really into astrology as a therapeutic tool to help yourself, see the archetypes as structures that will help you evolve through a bunch of lessons. But your emotional and psychological development that is outside the intention of the placement of Saturn in your chart also interfaces with your capacity to individuate your chart. In other words, to develop your chart. So if you work with your Saturn, for example, one of the things that I encourage you to look at is attachment styles. And there are 4 of them or 5 of them, because that will give you a very strong indication of the conditioning around how your Saturn was emotionally developed growing up. And I'm noticing, or I'm beginning to observe, notice, and pay attention and research this relationship between attachment style that we have uniquely. So how we developed our early attachment bonds to our parent. Okay. And if you're in a situation where the parent wasn't available and you were adopted, or there was a parent that left your life in an early on, that will absolutely shape your emotional and psychological relationship to how you attach. So attachment theory, attachment style, and the relationship between stressful transits that you deal with. Okay. So this ties in with the greater scheme of what I see with the planetary energies that we're experiencing at the moment, with Venus in opposition to Saturn, Venus squaring Mars, Mars squaring Saturn, and this entire connection of planets. And so when what I found really fascinating, what I found really interesting was that if you look at the chart of the full moon, you'll see that there is a moon sextile, moon in Pisces sextile Uranus and Taurus. Okay, and the relationship between Taurus and Pisces within the zodiac is the way that we form a relationship to the unknown. Okay. So to make it in a more practical style, when was it the last time you found yourself in a situation where life was changing and shifting for you, and there was a tremendous amount of uncertainty? Okay, there was a tremendous amount of the unknown. And so your relationship to interfacing with the unknown would be the Taurus part, which is your relationship to yourself, your feeling of safety in yourself. And then the relationship to Pisces, which is the unknown. It's like the intangible. It is the uncontrollable. Okay, so we've got Moon in Pisces, sextiling Taurus, Uranus and Taurus. And I found it really significant because while this was in the new moon, this full moon configuration with the sun being in Virgo, of course, and Virgo, the sun actually making this trine aspect to Uranus in Taurus. And then the backdrop of this transit was Saturn, Venus, and Mars in this T-square, okay? So this T-square indicates change. And the reason why it indicates change is because we've got Mars in Aries, cardinal sign, Capricorn, cardinal sign, and we have Venus in Cancer, cardinal sign. So we're talking about the shift in emotional identification with something, right? We are shifting our sense of identity from one direction to another, and it's happening very progressively, so you don't actually feel it as intensely as wow, I'm doing a 180, although you might actually experience that, who knows, but there is definitely a gradual shift in sense of self. Now, what has that got to do with this sextile with Venus, with Taurus or Uranus and the moon, and what has that got to do with this earlier ramblings that you're talking about with how we develop as children? Well, it's really fascinating to me to come back down to the psychology of a child, and particularly somebody or a child that is between the ages of 0 and 2 years old. To them and to us when we were that age, the world didn't have any boundaries. Okay, when we identified objects within the scope of our reality, we never saw that those objects were separate from ourselves. And so we were very holistic in our sense of self. Okay. So this Pisces element is very predominant. Moon in Pisces, we've got this aspect, this relational sense of self that we have. And then, so we interact with life, right? And when we see our mother or our caregiver, primary caregiver, you can see how at an earlier part of the life, and I'll get into the correlation between stressful aspects, the way that we attach to those stressful aspects or respond to those stressful aspects, how that's tied in with this grand cross that's taking place, and what we see collectively in the world in terms of the neurosis of psychological and emotional dysregulation that's taking place. Because what we are really actually having a tremendous amount of things coming to the surface is not only our struggle to relate to reality in a place in which we can actually safe, secure, but we can also integrate safety and security within ourselves. There's a lot of people that are within this chaos time, drowning or not able to actually facilitate their own individuation or healing process, because the complexity of life is becoming so much more that it's actually leading to us, emotional dysregulation, chaos, crisis, pain, suffering, all of that coming to the surface. And Tara, yes, you're right, including the caregiver. Exactly. So regress back to this description of the self. And so we have this caregiver part of us that's present, and we don't identify it as separate from ourselves, right? This is this Pisces part of us. And what happens here is that as we kind of grow, particularly around the 2-year mark, because I'm not entirely sure of the person's name exactly. I will put it in the comments, but the Body Keeps Score is the book, and it is it's an amazing book, by the way. It's probably one of the best books I've listened to on Audible, on the nature of trauma itself. But he was talking about, it's a guy from Holland. I don't want to butcher his name. I have a vague memory. It's like Von Bessel or something. But he talked about, or he was referencing the observation of the prefrontal lobes at the age of 2 developing an ability to, or developing within our neurochemistry, to want to separate. And so what I find really fascinating about this Mars, when we get a Mars return, it's at 2 years, we go through a growth spurt, we start to want to separate ourselves slightly from this known self. And what generally tends to happen is, as we begin to venture out into the world, so this is the Capricorn part that I was talking about in the video yesterday, is that as we venture out into the world, we start to have experiences that, when the object in our environment is threatening, it invokes that primal sense of insecurity or fear, as it were. So embedded within the nature of our body is these very primal experiences of us being in our child infantile state, and as in our psychological development is still in that very oneness state, it experiences that. And so we can't distinguish between that being something separate outside of ourselves and something that is the self. So progressively over a period of time, what we do is, especially around the age of 2, is we start to move out of this comfort zone. And so we abandon the sense of self and explore the world, and we come into contact with our own limitations, right? The role of the parent. Now, what I'm trying to put across here is that as we move through this time, as in Saturn in Capricorn leading to Aquarius, and Jupiter in Pluto, Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, but mostly them being in Capricorn, we're talking about the psychological and emotional development of maturation, and in particular, the prerequisite to individuation. So individuation is to separate self from the sense of self, or a sense of security that has been internalized, that is the crutch for one's ability to feel secure, to individuate from that into your own sense of self, okay? So to actually differentiate between the government saying, this is the rules and you obey us, and you going, yes, that's correct, I should do that, versus, no, that doesn't seem correct for me, I have my own brain, I have my own thoughts, I can think for myself, kind of thing, right? So this is the kind of schism that starts to manifest itself when these two polarities of self individuating into its own self, and then being able to understand the objective world, right? So begin to understand the objective world, meaning that over there is not me. And so I can relate to that. That's why the attachment comes in over here. So when we're talking about this process of this time, as in Saturn and everything moving to Aquarius, we are getting to emotionally mature and grow up. And that process includes stepping outside of the comfort zone of your sense of self and exposing yourself to a little bit more of the world while remaining secure and stable enough to know that you can meet the need to soothe / reassure / parent the experiences that you have and the impressions you have from the outside world. It's very, very, very cool stuff. And it's I get it in a very profound sense, because these are my thoughts and my musings at the moment in terms of the way that we're kind of interfacing emotionally and psychologically with the way that we are trying to individuate or reparent ourselves at the moment, and what we are trying to deal with within ourselves, and in other words, our emotional development, particularly. And I think that these transits over here speak to something really interesting about the relationship between regressing back to that adolescent stage when things become so intense, and almost in a sense disassociating to that regressed state in which the constellation of your reality was oneness. In other words, we return to a state in which the idea of love itself, or the experience of oneness itself, is not actually a healthy sense of oneness, which is I am one interfacing with another person that is one in that way. And although we are collectively in this kind of experience together, it is not actually identifying the self as we, but it's identifying the self as I. Because, and this is the key thing here, is that if we were to identify the self as we and then create or be stuck in the fantasy of the child in which it envelops the whole entire reality as one and doesn't differentiate itself, it leads to patterns of codependency, which then creates the psychology of needing to be dependent on hierarchical structures as opposed to being able to be responsible for the life. And so what I'm seeing here in this context is the split between the ability to recognize that one has a choice, even if within the context of the world that we're living right now it can feel very, very limiting. But to be able to differentiate yourself from people and the collective, and also when I say differentiate from the collective, I don't mean in the sense of like, but to see yourself as your own bubble with your own experience with your own self, and then to not, as I said, as a default, like allow governmental structures to fear shock you into surrendering your authenticity for security. And this is the thing that I've been talking about a lot over the last couple of videos that we've been doing. And it was deeply brought up as I was really listening to Dr. Gabor Mateo's work around this early life primal behavioralism, where we learn to trade our security or our authenticity for security, because it is something that is rooted in our survival. So the fundamental building blocks of our actual reality itself is coded deeply within this behavioral pattern. And so it's disempowering to us, because when we're trying to take charge of our life, we find ourselves being like thwarted or unconsciously blocked by the behaviorism of not knowing that the fear that shows up within the limbic system and within the primal brain, that is related to the early parts of your life in the state where your sense of self is in one with everything and is encompassing everything. Those parts where you were like, oh wow, that was really intense. And so you begin to, as I said, you begin to see life as something that you are experiencing and that other people are experiencing and is happening. And so we're all kind of collected within this, we're all bound in this process, but we're individuated. So I'm going to just pause for a moment over here, because I've opened up quite a lot of multiple threads here, and I just wanted to tie them in so that it sounds a little bit more coherent. So what I'm saying is this. I'm saying that there's something really fascinating about the astrology at the moment and the symbolism, where we are trying to synthesize in our lives. Well, let me put it this way. The evolutionary potential gives us this opportunity to emotionally mature to a point in which the core sense of self that you are is able to be identified separate to the other person, and in that sense begin to break down dependency on external structures as the people that are coming to save us, okay? Or that you at some point will be saved, or that we need to be saved. It breaks down that whole entire fantasy, that whole entire illusion, and it brings something really intense and focused into your life. And it says you are the master of your destiny. You have the capacity to make and respond to choices every single day, and that those choices that you have and that you make every single day, if you have allowed yourself the concentration to focus on something, will lead you to that place, will bring you to that place, and whatever that might mean for you, to live your life, free of anxiety, of, if you're somebody that's a Pluto and Sagittarius soul at the moment, that's trying to, stand up and say, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. This is my interest. And you fear that you might be rejected. The Pluto and Libras, as an example, that are learning how to break out of patterns of codependency, in which there's also been people pleasing, because we were raised to raise our parents, as an example. The Pluto and Scorpios that are dealing with the wounding associated with abandonment and the betrayal linked with, and the abuse of power, as an example. Pluto Virgos, you're working through the psychological patterns within yourself in which you have this incessant feeling of inferiority, or this part of you that just feels that you're not good enough, as an example, and you can't possibly, follow your purpose in life, or that there's this guilt dynamic that's rooted deeply within your pattern. You're needing to apologize for everything, as an example. So these are the kind of things that are generationally being worked through independently, and we're all trying to individuate from these identity structures that we have formed as parts of ourselves, because the psychological and emotional relationship to forming an attachment to an external governing structure became the narrative, or became the natural response, because at the time, as I said, when we were learning how the world worked, we had a lot of experiences. We all have experiences when the self learns that it is not, that everything in its environment is not, it's interconnected, but it's not interconnected, meaning that other people, and it's got a little bit of a thread over here. Not all people are good. Not all experiences are good. And how do you differentiate? How do you allow yourself to put a boundary in place and say, that's not a positive experience for me, and I won't let myself do that again? How do we navigate our way of doing things in a way that anchors in our own personal truth from that space? And then from there, we kind of flourish out from a sense of self that understands ourselves as interconnected with the cosmos, but still is able to differentiate between an experience that is not healthy for you or is. How do you break out of a relationship that is not supporting you, in that sense? So it's something very profoundly deep to contemplate on this full moon, and that is the relationship of becoming an adult and recognizing illusions, Neptune, that we have needed to put in place, or that emotionally and psychologically have come in place, because the psyche or the personality has created a protection mechanism or a defense mechanism, example, and then as a response to that, it is a self that holds an illusion of something. And a lot of the time when we're stuck in that illusion, we're always consistently asking people to, and this is the key of it as well, so we're always asking people to act in a way that keeps that sense of security safe. And it's a very dangerous thing, because it leads us to feeling like we need to control other people in order to feel safe. And every single one of us has done this. I've done it lots of times. You've done it lots of times. Let's just be honest about it. When we don't feel safe around something, part of us will need to control the outcome of the experience, right? And it doesn't have to be grand. It can just be but it's there. We need to create that, have that illusion of safety met. And that's one of the things that I think is so dangerous about the Neptune in Pisces transit at the moment, is creating a culture and manifesting a culture and a world in which the ideal, most utopian psychological and emotional state exists, and that we all live happy ever after. But we're all deeply policing ourselves, because heaven forbid that you do something wrong, or you do something like that, and it threatens the boundary of safety, and it creates emotional dysregulation, and then everything's going crazy because that person committed a crime. Think about Demolition Man as an example. It's just one of those things. Okay, so that's my spiel on that over there. I'm going to just jump onto some questions from the Patreon, and let's see what there is. Okay. All right. So Monica says, Monica is over here. I'm still gonna see how I can get the questions on the actual screen itself. But Monica says, thanks so much for the amazing step-by-step understanding of the relationship between the archetypes. Cool. Thank you, Monica. I'm really glad that you found value in that. I sense a closing of the expectations of being taken care of by the outer authority. Exactly. And also a new beginning, if which one decides to exercise his or her own free will to move towards liberation. That's right. Exactly. It is not like two opposing forces, rather like the ending, full closure of a cycle. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of see if I get to your question, which is, okay, so the abyss exists as such, which is truth. It's the Neptune part, the unknown, right? The psyche identifies that. Will there be another opportunity for souls further down, or is this the great divide the nodes and the square in multiple signs is telling us? That's a really good question. I am not certain, but what I can say to you is that it probably will be a lot more difficult to, once the pattern and schism takes place and society starts to go in its opposite directions and people start to make decisions that are either trading security for authenticity or the other way around, it will probably be more difficult to come out of that structure and awaken and then come into the other structure. But it's possible, who knows? But I definitely think that we are in a time in which that is highly emphasized at the moment, this great divide. And we don't see it. Like, this is the weird thing about it is that I'm giving you a run by play commentary of this thing, or at least my observation of it. But my sense of it is that it doesn't look like it's actually happening as fast as it's happening. But you can definitely see it in that sense as well. Okay. All right. So, and when the nodes move into Scorpio and Taurus axis, will they be strengthening in terms of the values that we will give into all of it? Yes, that is correct. When the nodes do move into Taurus and Scorpio, I think that's when it's going to be a very significant kind of abandonment of this, or the betrayal of that, and the separation of that, and the letting go of that. And that will happen when Saturn is in Aquarius. Absolutely. And Jupiter's probably in Pisces at that time, or maybe the end degrees of Aquarius. Okay. All right. Okay. Hi, Melina. Let's have a look. Okay. So you've got a question. All right. So it's about the full moon and last full moon. Okay. So the last full moon had in Aquarius. All right. And this was exactly on your natal return. Okay. All right. So you had a full moon in Aquarius. When the full moon was in Aquarius, it landed on your natal moon. Okay. Opposing your sun sign in Leo, 11 degrees. Okay. So this full moon is in 10 degrees Pisces, exactly opposite your Pluto. All right. So the last full moon you had was opposed your sun. This one's opposed your Pluto. All the time Uranus is both squaring my sun and trining my Pluto. I wonder how you would interpret this transit. Okay. So, well, I would say that if you have a new moon landing opposed your sun sign, a full moon opposing your sun sign through one transit, particularly in the Leo Aquarius axis, this will have to do with the re-assimilation or reintegration. If you've got the sun in Leo, the likelihood of you needing to reintegrate displaced emotional experiences within your life is highly likely. Okay, so I've noticed in all the charts that I've done, when the sun sign is the sun is in Leo, I've noticed that there's also been a very important need to validate one's own personal reality. And you'll notice that you'll come into this lifetime where this very, very strong Leo energy is present, but you will see that you would have experienced a lot of kind of like detachedness or emotional disassociation as part of your nature, and the Leo energy is wanting you to validate it so that you become more present with your life. Okay, so this is about actually becoming more conscious of creativity, conscious of experiencing things that really allow your body to feel as if you're excited about things, you know? Okay. So that's that. The full moon. Okay. So the full moon then landed opposed to Pluto. Now, and you're saying that Uranus is both squaring your sun and trining your Pluto. So again, because you have Uranus trining squaring your sun sign, and you're having aspects made to your sun sign and made to your Pluto, which is what you're saying here, I would say that this has a lot to do with integrating deep emotional experiences related to the soul. So whatever your soul's journey is related to that, it is integrating very important aspects of your emotional and psychological life, Pluto. So what does empowerment look like to you, and how can you integrate integrate aspects of your creative self in a consistent way? That's how I'd respond to that transit. Okay. So like you said that you've got your painting class. It's like, do more of those things. Do more of the things that are interesting and creative for you. Okay. Okay. So let's have a look. Apart from that, Neptune is trining my north node and, of course, sextiling your south node for half the year. Could this imply a real new start away from all of my trauma? Yes. The answer is yes, 100%. I have to start to live. Live. My therapist said on Monday. Yes, that's right. You need to live. Exactly. There it is. Completely. There's the message from Uranus squaring a sun sign and trining your Pluto. Right? It's time to live. Okay, fantastic. So David, I see that you've got a question over here on the chat box. So your question is on YouTube chat. Fantastic. All right, so how does this full moon in Pisces help us to realize that every time we feel like a victim when outside events don't happen the way that we want, we are deluding ourselves, right? So that's the point. The point is that, and that ties into to understanding the way in which we have psychologically and emotionally developed personalities and response mechanisms and coping mechanisms, as it were, and we've attached ourselves to had the psychology of attaching ourselves to outside events and them triggering us, and we are then stuck in a state where we feel that experience itself is the result, is causing us to feel this pain. Now, I'm sure most of us are adults right now, considering that Saturn has gone through Capricorn, and so each situation is different. Like, if you think about a very horrific trauma, for instance, where you're in a car accident, or that you've been exposed to something in which it is literally out of your control, that's a different scenario, right? You were a victim to something. We can become attached to that experience as an identity, and this is something else here. It's that, and I think this is what's going to happen in the world as well with Neptune and Pisces. We've become overly identified with our suffering. And so it becomes an identity because the very nature of the identity is there to protect us from a feeling of the abyss, right? So that's the Neptune and the Taurus and the Pisces part again in the sextile in the natural zodiac, is that there is always this recognition and realization that if you sort of, just stood outside and looked at the cosmos, for instance, we're so insignificant, we're so small in this process, and yet our personalities are like as if this is, we have some special mission. And yeah, fair enough, if that supports you to feel like it gives you meaning in life, which we all need to have, then that's fantastic, but ultimately speaking, at the most Neptunian level, all of these relationships we form to external things come from these early life developments, our emotional developments, the phase where we are completely secure with the self, and then we venture out into the world. We have negative experiences or experiences that are really overwhelming, or we experience a shock. The parent says no, and we learn to the self begins to fracture, and then it begins to form a self as in you, and then a self as in the experiences outside of yourself. And so we have constellations of experiences. And if those constellations of experiences have got negative emotional attachments to them, then this new moon or full moon in Pisces is supporting the Saturn work, and the Venus in Cancer and the Mars in Aries, which is all squaring Pluto, is bringing these attachments to the surface. Okay. And these attachments that are having to the surface, they're coming to the surface. We need a process where we felt disempowered, and that's where we've got to acknowledge. We've got to grieve that process. So this is helping us work through the parts of the attachments that we have to life and the reasons why we have those attachments, and if those attachments were formed out of a real authentic choice, or a part of us that felt like we needed to trade our security or our authenticity for security out of fear. Okay. So, it's just about really being real and just saying, hey, like, I'll give you an example. Okay. So let's say there's a part of you that's stuck in a 5-year-old stage. Okay. You weren't mirrored correctly as a child. And so you're having a conversation with somebody and you're noticing that your body's getting a little bit agitated by the interaction, right? And you're getting a little bit agitated. And one of the things that's agitating you is that you notice that they're not having enough eye contact. Now, your body is experiencing the signaling of that 5-year-old where you may have not had the eye contact you need. Maybe you've got Chiron in the 8th house, or maybe you've got Moon in the 8th house as an example. And so, you're sensitive to lack of intimacy at that stage. So that brings up this material to the surface, and you can feel like when we're in the outer critic stage, which is you can blame the other person by saying whatever the emotion comes up to the surface. And what you want to do is you want to check in with yourself and say, what of this experience was showing me that needs to be ironed out, or that needs to be grieved, or that needs to be, that part of that personality is stuck in a little more adolescent part of ourselves. And we kind of need to work on that so that the nervous system becomes more free and it's not stuck in these emotional stages of our development, essentially. And so we're healing that process with those things. Okay. Okay, so Pamela, you're saying the moon is in conjunct my natal Chiron in the 10th, and I'm thinking this is very supportive to healing. Absolutely, 100%. If the moon is conjunct your Chiron, I would say that the healing process will look like a sensitivity to how you may have felt safe as a child, and then how that lack of safety, when it's represented in the big bad world, triggers you to feel angry, and then the anger comes out and it says, here I'm not feeling safe, but it will look like the outer critic, which is everything that's wrong with that person's behavior. And this is the thing here again, is that it's not to justify other people's behavior as okay. It's to recognize that that is not something that is safe for us, and to also recognize how we can become more conscious of the messages that our emotions are showing us about early parts of our development that never got that opportunity to feel safe when the self was venturing out away from the security of the caregiver of the mother, and you experienced or encountered something that was really dangerous. Does that make sense? Okay. Cool. So I'm going to open up the chat box just for a little bit more, maybe 1 or 2 questions, and then we'll be closing down the stream, okay? Okay, so Linda, you're saying we have had our security and freedom curtailed forever. That's correct. It feels like because as part of our evolution to give our power away, not realizing the consequences or the fact that this is what we did. Yeah, I mean, whatever it is that, if that's the case, like, we have learned how to give that away. And I definitely think there's a huge part of our Pluto lesson that's rooted in that. Absolutely. And it's a collective kind of shift that's taking place. And so we're all kind of individually healing it for ourselves. And then as a byproduct of that individual healing, it's kind of creating, or it is reflecting the overall collective shift that is taking place within this process. So I reclaim my power because I know how to use it. Awesome. I love that. For good of all my relations. Awesome. thereby realizing our security and freedom can only be our responsibility. Therefore, co-creating a new foundation. Couldn't have said it better. Perfect. Love it. That's amazing. Thanks very much for sharing that, by the way. Okay. Clicked refresh there. And let's check the chat box with us over here. Oh my gosh, there is a lot of questions that are showing up and the thing is not showing it. Hold on. Let's have a look. There's lots. Okay. Okay, we're going to make that a bit bigger, but hopefully. Okay, it seems that it's caught up. Never mind. I'm just noticing something different over there. Okay. All right, peeps. Well, anyone got last more question before I head out for this live stream? While I'm waiting for a question, if there is any, no pressure. What I wanted to say was, if you have purchased the Saturn Workshop, go onto Patreon right now. You will see that there is a Saturn support thread that is intended to support us as we're processing. So if there's material that comes up to the surface that you want to talk about, put it out there. We'll intend to put some live, we'll put like Zoom links in, we'll catch up on a Zoom call, and we'll talk about it through there as well. So yeah, if that's something that you find interesting or valuable, please, I encourage you to check that out. Okay. Okay. All right, peeps. I'm going to leave it at this. Check in with my emotional need at this point in time. Pretty exhausted from the day. It was an amazing opportunity to sit and share some space with you. I really hope that you got something out of this. And I look forward to connecting with you all again on the Patreon community page, as well as other posts that you feel that you are engaging in. And I wish everybody an amazing day, okay? Or evening. Take care, everybody.